Peabody Energy, the world's largest private sector coal company, serving customers in 25 countries on 6 continents. Peabody sells both metallurgical coal used to make steel and thermal coal, which is used to generate electricity. Joining me now to talk more about his business and the state of coal demand, Peabody Energy Chairman and CEO Greg Boyce. Good to see you, Mr. Boyce. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria. It's good to be with you.
First, given you are in the electricity and energy business, your thoughts on what we know occurred over the weekend with Russia acquiring Crimea.
Well, I think what's interesting from the energy business, Maria, is that it puts a sharp focus on the fact that we have to have a better discussion around energy supply globally, because there's no question that geopolitics are so much a basis of energy supply and demand. One of the interesting things you were talking about natural gas, it's going to raise a discussion in this country about the export of natural gas, because the only way for Europe and the rest of the world to be more, have more of an ability to use gas is if there's multiple sources, which means the U.S. surplus of gas. We're going to have a national discussion around how much of that we export.
Yeah, it's a great...
Ultimately, it all comes back to my business, coal. And coal has been the fastest growing fuel in the world. These are the reasons why it continues to be the fastest growing fuel in the world. It's dispersed, it's easy to transport, it's low cost, and it eliminates risks around the geopolitics.
Let me get your take on what happened to coal and the market given the slowdown in China. We know that the economic landscape has changed or is changing. Has that impacted your business?
Well, interestingly enough, China in the first 2 months of this year hit record imports for coal. And globally, coal demand continues to rise. The markets right now are impacted by strong supply. A lot of new production was built when coal prices were very high, typical commodity cycle. We're working that oversupply off. But demand through this entire time frame, Maria, has continued to grow. And we just saw this morning that China's announced a massive infrastructure building program through 2020. New roads, highways, airports, bridges, subways that all take steel. And all of that will require a continued increase in electricity generation build, which is going to come predominantly from coal.
What is the process of that generation with regard to clean coal? Because the environmentalists are still upset by the usage of coal because of the dirty pollution around it.
Well, as you know, Maria, we've launched, Peabody's launched our Advanced Energy for Life campaign. And that campaign is designed to elevate the discussions around the use of today's current state-of-the-art coal technologies, which are far cleaner than coal use has ever been, and then the development of the next generation. Because right now, we've got 3.5 billion people globally that don't have access to electricity. We got half the children in the developing world that go to school with zero electricity. And if we're going to meet the Millennium Goals for poverty eradication, if we're going to meet our environmental goals, whether that's clean water, electricity for health, and lower carbon emissions, we're going to have to do that with coal.
We got to get to the president. I'm so sorry, Mr. Boyce. All right, President Obama making it official, explaining those sanctions that he signed into order on specific individuals undermining the sovereignty of Ukraine. Also talked about new expansive scope of those sanctions on Russian officials. We have been talking with Peabody Energy Chairman and CEO Greg Boyce. Greg, sorry about interrupting you talking about coal as the president came out and started speaking. What are your observations post-President Obama's commentary there?
Well, it's interesting, Maria. I think as we take it back to the energy markets and to coal, it just underscores what we have been saying, and that is we have to have a global energy infrastructure that supplies low-cost available power, low-cost available energy, whether that's nuclear, natural gas, coal, renewables, whatever we want to throw into the mix. And we have to have that across the globe, because what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the Far East, the Middle East, even here in our own cities, in our own country, where, you know, we've got 100 million people on energy assistance from the government, we have to develop the mix, and coal is fundamental, a broad-based part of that mix. And so all of the policies that you see that work against coal all of the discussion around climate targets through 2050 are getting the cart way before the horse. We've got to solve our energy equations globally. That's going to drive economic activity. It's going to drive political stability. And it's going to drive better environmental performance, because we'll have the economies that can support it. If we don't do that, we won't make progress on poverty, we won't make progress on economic development, and we won't make the environmental progress that we want to make. So that's...
Do you think, Mr. Boyce, do you think that these sanctions are going to move anybody actually doing business in Russia? I mean, do you have any business in Russia at this time?
We buy some coal and trade coal from Russian counterparts. We'll have to see how these sanctions impact that. So we don't have a large component of our business in Russia. And I think depending on how long these sanctions go on, it will have an impact. They traditionally do. But we'll just have to see. And then we'll have to see whether there's additional layers of sanctions, as the president mentioned. All
right, let's slip in a short break. We have more with Peabody Energy Chairman and CEO Greg Boyce. Greg, stay right there. We'll take a short break and then come right back as we watch this market trade higher on Wall Street, up 170 points on the industrial average. Back in a moment on Opening Bell. Welcome back. Well, the breaking news of the day, President Obama just wrapping up at the White House. The president maintained his stance that the Ukraine crisis can be resolved diplomatically, but warned that the U.S. is ready to impose further sanctions. President Obama also said Vice President Biden is headed to Europe tonight to meet with his counterparts on the crisis, and that he himself will be headed across the Atlantic next week. The market's not reacting much to the president's comments today. The Dow holding on to triple-digit gains, with a gain on the session right now of 153 points. Still with me is Peabody Energy Chairman and CEO Greg Boyce. Greg, are you surprised at this market reaction that the Dow is up 155 points in the face of these sanctions, where the president just said that he has signed an order that they can actually escalate and they will be expansive sanctions?
Well, I think the market always looks for a bit of certainty, and I think maybe what we got over the weekend is that we're moving into a sanction phase rather than some kind of potential military phase. So my sense is that probably has given people a little breathing room here as we look forward. I think as these sanctions unfold, we start to see what economic impact they have. You know, the markets will take the reaction and their guidance from those. But I think for at least today, a bit of a breather from the weekend activities.
You know, you said a moment ago, your campaign for energy for life, that there is a lack of energy for so many people outside the United States. Tell us about that. And is the opportunity for Peabody Energy then largely outside the U.S. with the population growth and needs of electricity?
Well, certainly when you look at global demand over the next 20 years, that will mostly be from outside the United States. But I would remind everybody that where we sit today, coal produces 44% of the electricity in the U.S. That's twice what natural gas produces. So the concept that we're moving away from coal, we've reduced coal and broadened our mix, but we're far and away from moving out of coal as a mainstay of electricity supply in this country. And that's critical because we've got energy poverty in this country. We've got people that can't afford to pay their electricity bills. We have seen what's happened to natural gas pricing in this winter alone, and that variability. So we need to maintain a broad base, and we need to focus on low-cost opportunities so we can stay competitive. And globally, there's just a massive demand for energy, Maria, that is unmet, that will be unmet if we don't continue to use coal. And that's why the rest of the world, Japan has increased coal production, is building new coal plants because of their nuclear issues. Germany has built the newest coal plants in 15 years because of the price of gas and folks not wanting more nuclear. Now we see Europe saying, what are we going to do with Russia, playing political games with gas supply and gas price? So all across the globe, we're seeing coal be the #1 go-to fuel source. Our task, Globe's task, is to make sure we use today's technologies for that coal, which will significantly improve the environmental performance.
Yeah, it's amazing what technology has done. Greg Boyce, good to have you on the program. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maria. Good to see you. We'll be glad to be back.
We'll see you soon. Peabody Energy Chairman and CEO Greg Boyce joining us on coal and energy needs in the country and the world, really. The market up 147 points on the Dow Jones Industrial Average.